So my earliest memories of making art, drawing and journaling were from the first grade when I attended St. Joseph's Grammar School in Medford. Each year the Catholic Archdiocese would hold its annual art contest, which I entered and won. Winning was quite important to me at the time because it got lots of praises from many of my family members, a couple who were actually fine artists and working artists. The piece was a drawing of three people walking by a tributary of the Mystic River, which ran behind the school. That most vivid early memory of journaling, and I think it was maybe because it was easier to express myself visually as a 6-year-old, unable to really write a lot of sentences or to write paragraphs. In the 3rd grade, we moved to a new town. I met a group of like-minded troublemakers who did stick figure comic books, and this is interesting. We were like a kid collective producing visual stories faster than Marvel and DC. Imagine pieces of paper the size of Post-its stapled together. And I don't think anybody here actually grew up in the 60s, but you could not get unlined paper. The only paper that was available was lined paper. And we would, this is actually the style of comic that I would do. And it was always these monsters with eyes that were bloodshot, you know, because you could always draw like veins in their eyes. And they always had a smile because we were shooting them with guns, so these little stick dot figures.
So
and we always lined paper. What reason, I don't know, other than, you know, probably because people wrote on lined paper, and in schools everything was like penmanship and and printing, and you know, you were supposed to stay in between the lines. Between the 3rd and 6th grade, I discovered mixed media. I would use milk bottle caps. We actually would use the milk bottle caps to draw the heads for these like comics that we did. But then we started to use the milk bottle caps as the art. And I would also use wood, wheat paste, turning them into monsters and topographical maps. In 6th grade, I went from a failing grade in geography for not knowing the state's capitals to a B because of my map of South America, which was a topographical map made with wheat paste, which was kind of pretty cool. It was also in the 6th grade that I discovered Leonardo Da Vinci, the great mixed media artist of the Renaissance. Miss Avery, my 6th grade teacher, had gone to Paris and had sent me a postcard of the Mona Lisa. I wrote about him, but was more intrigued in defining my world in a very similar way. Mona, my piece in 249 Gallery for this Open Studios, may be a tribute to that memory. I'm not sure. I think it's actually an ex-girlfriend or something. You know, kind of pretty scary look. Entering high school in Lowell, I learned to sculpt wood, invent electrical devices, and manipulate and record my daily activities in a very unique way. I had an inkling for mechanical gears, probably because Lowell, where I would walk around after school, was full of abandoned water canals and factories, which had these big gears and rotting wooden locks, and the factories had all windows that were broken. It was really like it was down here early on. Remember when we had the abandoned train cars on Fan Pier and over by Pier 4, and so but anatomy was the one thing that always grabbed my spirit, and I still have, which is kind of interesting because my mother would save everything, but I have my anatomy drawings from you know, my freshman year in high school, taking physiology, and I loved to do anatomy drawings. It was always like, you know, to be able to draw a skull or to draw the skeleton or muscles was always pretty cool. So you know, and I always thought that was kind of like the foundation of art, you know, and again, maybe it was that Da Vinci thing where he drew quite extensively anatomy drawings. I was also a jock, which actually a buff who ran track. They called track athletes buffs. They didn't call us jocks. And while some young boys dreamed of space travel in the 1960s, I learned to use a pole to launch my body into the air. I was a pole vaulter, so like I was like flying up over bars, and it was pretty cool. There was no YouTube at the time, so we refer to Muybridge type photos from a magazine called Track and Field to understand the mechanics of my pursuit. Does everybody know who Muybridge is? You know, Muybridge.
Who's Muybridge?
Edward Muybridge is this photographer at the turn of the 1900s who did locomotion series. People jumping, people walking, people running.
I remember those.
Yeah.
It was also how he proved that
Skateboard magazines in the 70s used these multiple images so that kids would learn tricks. Well, before that, there was Track and Field magazines. So that was kind of like led me to start to think about this show that we're going to do, Tony and I are going to do, which is about body mechanics. So all of these pictures that are up here, we've been shooting the photographs for about 5 months now, and they actually, you can take it with the camera, you can actually do what Muybridge did by some setting that he discovered, which is
It's
like a multiple exposure.
yeah, multiple exposure.
Yeah. So the whole idea is based. The whole idea of the show is based on a drawing that I did, or a series of drawings I did in the early '80s, which was of the way that the body is divided in the sagittal plane, the coronal plane, and the transverse plane. And that's kind of the foundation of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. So really what we're doing is we're taking Vitruvian Man and we're overlaying photographs and creating sculptures out of the Vitruvian Man and sticking to the golden ratio kind of model, you know, mathematical model that's supposed to be very pleasing to the eye. In the fall of 1972, I met Al Ford, an artist who ran a martial arts school in the South End. As a teacher and mentor, he essentially pulled together every creative experience from my past. I studied, I wrote, I created, but mostly I contested nearly everything I was being taught in college. In 1977, Al Ford had an exhibit called Doors and Other Things, which completely redefined art for me. But that's kind of what this is. You know, I really loved that show. That show made such an impact on me because he used plaster, which I'm working on with that piece up there. It was kind of like fresco. He used doors, he used windows. So at that point, I wanted to tell my story through similar mixed media: plaster, fresco, doors, found objects, etc. 2 years later, Al Ford and I would go on to open Gallery East, a 5,000 square foot art space next to South Station. There, a multitude of worlds opened up to me, and mixed media became the norm. Anything and everything became art. There's one example I used where I took a piece of matzah and spray painted it day-glow orange. And, you know, Al Ford came along and he drew all these, like, what he called figures in motion on it, which I thought was like the greatest thing. But it's amazing how fast you can fill 5,000 square feet with found objects. After that first year of sorting through, we were in dumpsters, we were in alleys, we were taking architectural drawings that people were throwing out. It was just accumulating. It was just getting really out of control. After that first year of sorting through the accumulated art shit, I started keeping a visual journal, which this was a journal I started in 1981, and it was the same year that my daughter was born. And it was really important. It ended up, I don't know if any of you know Franz Mazariel, who was considered one of the fathers of the graphic novel, but he did his work in wood blocks and became very famous, and he was an inspiration toward the Communist Party in how they marketed their message. So a lot of the posters that you see look like Franz Mazariel artwork. He was also a socialist, so that probably helped the cause as well. The less I used words to articulate my experience, the more poetic the words actually became when I wrote. Religious imagery and mysticism also became a big part of journaling. I have, one thing in particular that Stations of the Cross was like a big deal. It's a project that I've been working on for a while. But you can see this is actually God is a piece of driftwood here, painted a little bit gold. This is the Holy Spirit. This is a crucifixion. On the back of it is the devil. So I have this like interplay between Satan and God or Jesus Christ, whoever. This was a show that we did at Gallery East called Blank Frank, and it was probably one of the best art performance pieces that I've ever seen. David, I forget his last name. It was great because he had two puppets in each hand talking to each other, and he was just pretty remarkable. Organizing shows and drawing the public into this avant-garde experience was our prime directive. The event was as important as the art because that's where you got your ideas. Making art almost became secondary, and you were vacillating between the conventional and free thinking. And mixed media is just that. I think it's a medium to work in, not a skill to be limited by. I never, and a lot of people I know, never wanted to be known as the person who worked in wood, or the person who worked in pastel, or the person who worked in a particular medium. You never wanted to be defined by that. So, I think with mixed media, there's a serendipitous aspect to it, where there's a certain amount of chance that leads to good feelings. When she saw that piece, she said, "What's that, your toilet?" Referring to Marcel Duchamp's Our Mutt piece, where he took a urinal, put it on the wall. So I took a page out of Trump's fake news, and I call it fake art. That's the title of it. But I also wrote a poem that kind of goes along with it. So I wrote this poem. It goes impulsivity, impulsiveness, instant gratification, find it all instantly on the web. Cut and paste. It began on the computer. No, not the old cut and paste. No scissors, no glue, no ruler, no grid. The work never had to be erased. No whiteout, no bubbles, or misaligned paste out. Imagine the caution, the care, and the focus to write a Bible with ink. A mistake would cost you a page. Now, millennium forward, now we want it. At what cost? The cut and paste, the modulation of the 1980s became the internet of the 1990s, a movement toward instant. The 1990s internet became email, became cell phones, became MySpace, texting, facing, by a world of twits. Now, where are we? Where will instant lead us? So that piece is kind of like an ode to new, millennials that really will probably never know what a rotary phone is. My other pieces, let's see. So this piece up here, I have a piece in the show at at the 300 Summer Street. It's a chair bottom which I carved out with a Dremel and made a print. So this is actually the print of what the chair looks like, and then once I made a print of it, I took the part that was carved out and I filled it with sand, and I painted the sand, so now it's the sea. And then I connected strings to a piece of driftwood that I found in the channel. I love the channel, and I can't wait till low tide enough to go down there and just like pick through like what washes up on shore. And when I was over at North Station, that piece in the corner was the same way. That one was in the show last year at 300 Summer, and that's
Is that the crucifix?
yeah, that's something that's part of a series that I'm working on called Visual Poetry, made with 3 objects. So the nail came out of the Charles River, the torso came out of the Charles River, and the board came out of the Charles River. And so I kind of like it. A friend of mine, Linda Brown, has a show over at the Kingston Gallery right now, and you know, hers is kind of like very similar, her work, but only she addresses the whole idea of plastic and the, you know, what's happening with plastic in the ocean. But she has a lot of organic elements to her work too. I like to use a little bit more organic stuff because when I was a kid, I mentioned before, I like to work with wood. I used to carve wood. I still like to collect wood carvings, masks. I work a lot with paper, so I think the materials that I'm more drawn to are more organic materials rather than, you work in styrofoam a lot, right? And yeah. So, yeah. So that's my visual haiku. That's one of the pieces. This is another. This is another piece. Where is it? Hiding somewhere here. I was walking down the street one day, and I found this bird, this complete bird. I found this complete bird skeleton, you know, and I was talking to Bonnie Minio last night, you know, about her, you know, her paintings, which this little guy reminded me of some of the paintings that she does. But this is a piece of driftwood that I found when I was in St. Martin, and I actually made an incense burner out of it. You know, I always liked, you know, my conversations with Paula was always about, you know, some aspect of, you know, Buddhism, and incense becomes a big part of that. My new series with the guitars, this one here I mentioned before, that's called Sicilian. That's actually Tony playing a guitar. You know, he's big into the whole Star Wars thing. So when I moved in here, there was a toaster, Darth Vader's head. So I took, and these are shish kebab skewers, the red strings, and this piece here was somebody had thrown out a bunch of these things. So I always said, wow, that looks like one of those Kiss guitars, you know, that, you know, John Anastas used to play at some iteration of Slapshot, you know. So I decided, and the chain is totally Tony, so I'm gonna like get that shirt from him, and I'm gonna use that shirt on his head, and the drawing is beneath it. So
The hand, don't forget the hand.
and yeah, the hand playing the guitar. So you know, I made another layer of. I used this plastic cast to do the fresco, and so once I get it wet, then I'll start painting on the wet plaster and get it just right. Another one that I started to work on, I call it Neptune's axe. So it's like the trident. And I was in Japan and I found a dolphin's head. So this gets attached here.
How do you always find these things?
I just,
It's
you know, like
intuitive that
Lenore.
you-
Lenore finds like some pretty cool stuff. when people have found objects, I'm always like envious of what they're finding, but people say the same thing to me, so I just, you know. But this goes on here, and then I'm gonna create.
You didn't kill that dolphin, did you?
No.
Oh, okay.
But it wasn't far from where the cove was. You know, the cove was in Wakayama. Where I found that was in Nagoya, which is in Aichi province. So this is the wire. The copper wire goes around here, and then I have a whole box of. Paula was kind enough to leave me a box of seashells, and I have some of my own that I brought back. So all these seashells will end up getting attached to the wire, and you know, that's another one of the guitars. So we have like a series of guitars that I'm making. Another one that I've got planned is a pocketbook with strings, you know, attached to it. And I'm going to show them over at Stubblebine's Luthier. So
Cool.
that's my life in mixed media.